It all started on September 12, 1995, when I pulled into the parking lot of the Pine Ridge Motel off Highway 20 in rural Nebraska. It was late. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the place bathed in a dull, flickering glow from a single buzzing neon sign. After another grueling day of driving and failed sales pitches, I was exhausted. I checked into room 8. The receptionist, Linda, I think her name was, gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed friendly enough, but there was something distant about her, something that reminded me how alone I was. My routine had become almost mechanical at this point. Endless highways, greasy fast food that left a metallic taste in my mouth, and nightly calls to Susan, my estranged wife, just to hear my 2 kids' voices. Those calls usually ended in arguments, sometimes about money, sometimes about my absence. My daughter was 9, my son 6. Too young to understand why Dad wasn't home anymore. Too young to know why I could barely bring myself to say goodbye at the end of those calls. Room 8 was shabby, in that way motels off old highways often are. The carpet had that unmistakable musty smell. The bed creaked under my weight, and the walls were paper thin. It was on that first night, as I lay there trying to sleep, that I heard the noises. Muffled cries, followed by dull thuds, coming from the room next door. I turned over, pulling the thin blanket up to my ears, hoping to drown it out. A domestic dispute, I told myself. Nothing I should get involved in. Nothing I wanted to be part of. The next morning, as I stepped out of my room to head to my car, I met a man in the parking lot. He looked rough, disheveled hair, clothes that seemed slept in, and eyes that darted around like a cornered animal. He caught my eye, gave me a quick once-over, and muttered, "Be careful around here." Before I could ask him what he meant, he was gone, slipping between 2 parked cars and out of sight. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just another drifter, someone down on his luck, paranoid from who knows what. I was too tired to care. But something about Pine Ridge Motel didn't sit right with me. That day, between visits to industrial plants and offices that weren't interested in what I was selling, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about the place. When I returned that evening, I noticed more of what I had missed before. Room 10, 2 doors down, seemed to have an unusual number of visitors, people coming and going at all hours, and Linda, the receptionist, was always around, handing small packages to shady individuals who barely glanced in her direction. Curiosity got the better of me. I was never one to meddle in other people's business, but there was something about Linda, about those late-night noises, that gnawed at me. So, I asked her about it. Casual, like I wasn't really interested. She stiffened, her friendly demeanor shifting in an instant. Her eyes went cold, her smile disappeared. "We mind our business around here, mister," she said, her voice flat. "Best you do the same." I nodded, backed off, but my stomach twisted into a knot. Whatever was happening at Pine Ridge, it wasn't good. Later that night I found it, a door hidden behind an old sagging curtain in my room, leading directly into room 9. It was small, almost like a maintenance hatch, and when I pushed it open, the stench hit me, acrid, chemical, unmistakable. The room was empty, but scattered across the floor were plastic bags filled with powder, boxes labeled with symbols I didn't recognize. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. Drugs. A lot of them. Enough to know that whatever Linda was running here, it was big. The realization made my blood run cold. I backed into my room, closed the hidden door, my heart pounding in my ears. The next few hours passed in a blur. I stayed in room 8, lights off, curtains drawn, trying to figure out what to do. I could leave, just get in my car and drive, forget any of this ever happened. But something kept me there, a mix of fear and a strange sense of responsibility. Maybe it was Tom. That was his name, I learned later. The disheveled man from the parking lot. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he was trying to tell me something important. The next night, things escalated. I heard footsteps outside my door, soft at first, then louder, like someone pacing. I peeked through the curtains and saw Linda, her expression no longer friendly or distant, It was cold, calculating. She was talking to someone, pointing towards my room. My stomach twisted and I knew I had to act. But before I could decide what to do, there was a knock at my door, sharp and insistent. I opened it to find Tom standing there, his eyes wide with urgency. "You need to come with me," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Now." He didn't give me a chance to argue, just grabbed my arm and pulled me out into the night. As we moved through the shadows, he told me everything. He was undercover, had been working this operation for months. Linda wasn't just a receptionist. She was the head of a drug ring, using the motel as a front for distribution. He had been gathering evidence, but it wasn't enough. And now, she suspected me. We made it to his car, parked far from the motel, hidden behind a line of trees. He handed me a flashlight and told me to stay low. Moments later, I heard the sound of glass shattering, shouts echoing through the night. Linda and her men had stormed room 8, expecting to find me there. My heart pounded as I realized just how close I'd come to being caught, or worse. The rest of the night was chaos. Tom called for backup, and soon, the place was swarming with law enforcement. I watched from a distance as they arrested Linda, her face twisted in rage, her eyes scanning the darkness as if she knew I was out there, watching. It was over, at least for her. But for me, it felt like something had just begun. After everything settled, Tom thanked me, said I'd done the right thing by not ignoring the signs. But it didn't feel like enough. I had spent so long ignoring everything, my family, my own life, that it almost cost me everything. It was time to change that. I decided to take some time off, to go back home and reconnect with the people I had pushed away. I called Susan the next morning, using a payphone at a diner down the road. I didn't know what to say, but when I heard my daughter's voice on the other end, I knew I had to try. The Pine Ridge Motel is still there, or so I've heard, but I never went back. I think about that place sometimes, about how close I came to disappearing into the shadows like so many others. Isolation can do that to you, make you blind to everything, even the danger right in front of you, but it also gave me a chance to see what mattered before it was too late. Story 2. On July 5th, 1995, I checked into the Lakeside Inn, a quaint little motel nestled near Lake Superior in a small town in Minnesota. It was one of those places you could easily miss if you weren't looking for it, hidden in the trees, just off a winding road that hugged the shoreline. For an aspiring writer like myself, the place seemed perfect. I was traveling across the country, exploring America's hidden gems, hoping to find inspiration for my stories. The Lakeside Inn, with its weathered sign and quiet charm, felt like exactly what I needed. The owner, Margaret, greeted me when I walked in. She was an elderly woman, with gray hair pulled into a loose bun and a soft, welcoming smile. There was something maternal about her, the kind of person who made you feel immediately at ease. She spoke of the town's history, about the early settlers and the lake that had provided for the community for generations. I listened, enchanted by the stories, and I couldn't help but feel that this was the sort of place where magic could happen, the kind of setting perfect for the stories I longed to write. I settled into my room, room 6, a modest space with floral wallpaper and a window that looked out towards the lake. The first night, as I unpacked, I felt a sense of peace. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and water, and the sound of the lake lapping against the shore had a calming rhythm. I thought, maybe this was where I'd finally write something worth sharing. But it wasn't long before things began to feel off. The staff, who I'd barely noticed on my first day, started to catch my attention. There were only a few of them, young and nondescript, but something about their behavior made me uneasy. They never met my eyes, always looking away when I spoke to them. When they passed by, they whispered among themselves, their voices low and urgent, stopping abruptly if they realized I was near. It was strange, but I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that my imagination was getting the best of me. The next day, I decided to explore more of the motel. The brochure in my room mentioned several common areas: a reading room, a lounge by the lake, and even a small library. But when I tried to find them, every door I came to was locked. I jiggled the handles, peered through the dusty windows, but the room seemed abandoned, closed off. I asked Margaret about it later, and her smile faltered for just a moment before she said, "Oh, those areas aren't open to guests anymore. Too much upkeep." Her answer seemed reasonable enough, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. Something that made me feel like she wasn't telling me everything. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the old building settling. Just past midnight I heard something else. Voices, distant but distinct. I got up, moved to the window, and looked out towards the lake. There, by the water's edge, I saw them. A group of people gathered in a circle, their silhouettes illuminated by the moonlight. They were swaying, their hands raised, their voices a low, rhythmic chant. My heart pounded as I watched, a cold dread settling in my stomach. It looked like some kind of ritual. I wanted to believe it was just a group of locals having a strange late-night gathering, but something about it felt wrong, unnatural. The next morning, I found something strange in my room. Underneath the desk, carved into the wood, were words. "Beware the chosen night." The letters were jagged, as if scratched in haste. I traced them with my fingers, a shiver running down my spine. The words stuck with me all day, a gnawing fear that I couldn't shake. I tried to write, to focus on anything else, but the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. It all came to a head that night. I stayed in my room, too unnerved to venture out. The staff were acting even stranger, their whispers more frantic, their glances more suspicious. Around midnight, I heard the voices again, this time closer, right outside my door. I moved to the window, and my breath caught in my throat. The group was back, gathered by the lake, but now I could see Margaret among them, her face lit by the moon, her expression cold and severe. They were performing the same ritual, but now I could hear snippets of what they were saying, words like sacrifice and the outsider. My blood ran cold. Suddenly there was a soft knock on my door. I jumped, my heart racing, and opened it a crack. It was one of the young staff members, a boy named Alex, who couldn't have been more than 19. He looked terrified, his eyes wide, his face pale. "You have to leave," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "They're going to come for you, tonight." Panic surged through me. I grabbed my bag, shoving in what little I had unpacked. Alex led me through the back halls of the motel, moving quickly, quietly, every step filled with urgency. He explained in hurried whispers. The townsfolk were part of a cult, something old, something tied to the lake. They believed they needed to sacrifice an outsider to ensure a bountiful harvest. Margaret, the sweet, elderly woman who had welcomed me so warmly, was their leader. My arrival hadn't been a coincidence. They had lured me here, chosen me. We made it outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I could hear the chanting growing louder, could see the flickering light of torches by the lake. Alex led me to his car, parked far from the main lot, hidden in the shadows. We drove away, the tires kicking up gravel, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't look back. We found a payphone at a gas station miles away, and I called the authorities. By the time they arrived at the Lakeside Inn, the place was empty. No sign of Margaret, no sign of the staff, or the strange gatherings by the lake. The rooms that had been locked were now open, empty, as if nothing had ever happened. The police didn't believe me. Why would they? It all sounded insane. But Alex backed me up, and that was enough to warrant an investigation. They found traces, symbols carved into trees, remnants of fires by the lakeshore, but nothing that could prove what I knew had happened. I left Minnesota the next day, but the experience stayed with me. I realized how close I had come to losing everything, how my decision to seek solitude had almost cost me my life. But it also gave me something else, a story worth telling. I decided then that I would write about it, that I would share what had happened, no matter how unbelievable it seemed. It gave me a new confidence in my instincts, in my path as a writer. For the first time, I felt certain that this was what I was meant to do. The Lakeside Inn might still be out there, somewhere by the shores of Lake Superior, but I won't be going back. And if you ever find yourself driving along a winding road in a small Minnesota town and you see a quaint little motel by the lake, do yourself a favor, keep driving.